Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all our speakers and to our lovely live audience tuning in from across the globe. Welcome to the virtual event of Freedom Hour, an online discussion hosted by Asia Freedom Institute, a nonprofit organization that calls for democracy and religious freedom in Tibet and China. I'm Sakina Butt, and I'm the moderator for today's panel discussion on China's repression and the future of Hong Kong. Joining me today are four remarkable pro democracy Hong Kongers who have made significant sacrifices in their lives for freedom and democracy in Hong Kong. We have Carmen Lau, Senior International Advocacy Associate at Hong Kong Democracy Council. We have Amy Siu, General Secretary at the European Hong Kong Diaspora Alliance. We have Joey Siu, Executive Counsel at World Liberty Congress, and we have Athena Tong, visiting researcher at University of Tokyo. I welcome all of you to this panel discussion, and thank you so much for being here. And I have deliberately kept the introduction of our speakers short so that we'll have more time for the discussion. But if our viewers would want to get the full bio of our speakers, then you can always go to Asia Freedom Institute's website. So today's discussion will focus on Beijing's imposition of the national security law in 2020 and how this new law has increased the challenges for democracy in Hong Kong and the path forward for those fighting for freedom. So the agenda for today is we will be starting off with three general questions intended to all the speakers, followed by four individual questions for each speakers. And then if we have time, then we have one general question intended to all our speakers. So without further ado, I would like to begin with the first general question, and we will begin with Carmen. The recent mass trial and sentencing of 47 pro-democracy activists in Hong Kong under the national security law represents a new low in China's and Hong Kong authorities, increasing the repression of the Hong Kong people, their political system, and freedom. Could you share your perspective on this unprecedented development? How has Beijing eroded Hong Kong's freedom?
Thank you,
Yeah.
Sakina. First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me to the panel again. And in response to the question, I'm sure that's the 47 pro-democracy activists who have just been sentenced has been dearly in our hearts for so long, like many of us. And this is not just the case is not just another national security case in Hong Kong, but it's personal to me. And I believe that a lot of Hong Kongers see this as a significant milestone. That's how the Hong Kong government and the Chinese government has been, oppressing and persecuting freedom fighters in Hong Kong. And since the national security law in 2020 and this year, the Hong Kong government is also has also implemented another national security ordinance, which is a very escalated version and in-house version of national security law in Hong Kong, and it is called the Article 23. And I must say that it has, again, it has the extraterritorial reach, and it does not only affect Hong Kong or inside Hong Kong, but also wider civil society worldwide. And specifically because a lot of diaspora members, they have families members back in Hong Kong, and these two national security law weaponizing by the Hong Kong government has been very effectively silencing not only dissent abroad, but also Hong Konger inside of Hong Kong who still wanted to do something.
Thank you so much, Carmen, and thank you for mentioning about the Article 23, and we will talk more about it in our later questions. Amy, let's hear your perspective on this. Amy, your mic is on mute.
Sorry about this. Can you hear me now? Thank you so much for having me, first of all. It's a wonderful opportunity that we can also say something from the perspective from Europe here. To add on to what Carmen just said, Article 23, yes, it has extraterritorial reach, but it's actually worse than that because it is you can apply the law retrospectively, which means it really doesn't matter when in the past you have done something that the Hong Kong government thinks is not good. It can simply use it even before the law was enacted. And that is one aspect. And then the second aspect is we have to remember that this national security law and the Article 23 are only the two latest chess games that the Hong Kong and Chinese government are playing. They have been playing a very, very long game ever since even before the actual changeover. They have been playing the game that is the so-called termite strategy. They have been undermining and infiltrating at every aspect of Hong Kong society. We're talking about education, the finance system, judicial system, police system. At any corner that you look, they have been sending their forces and their very secret efforts ever since for decades. And so up to this point, they have been building up this whole campaign of undermining Hong Kong's freedom and democracy. And so national security law and then Article 23 was just the latest two pieces on the game. And at this point, the entire system of freedom that we used to have is now completely dismantled.
Thank you so much, Amy. Joey, let's hear your perspective on this.
Sure. I'll just echo Carmen and Amy's remark on thanking you for organizing this panel, especially, coming out 2 days after the new round of arrest warrants was issued by the Hong Kong government, and after they had revoked the passports of, 7 more pro-democracy activists in exile. I think, when we talk about the mass trial and the sentencing of the Hong Kong 47, I think there are two really important things that this whole sentencing and the lengthy imprisonment have demonstrated to the international society. I think, first of all, that really shows how far the Chinese Communist Party is willing to go to ensure stability in Hong Kong. I think when we look at the Hong Kong 47 case, it is very, very important for us to bear in mind the fact that these 47 Hong Kong pro-democracy activists, they're not just those who have advocated for Hong Kong independence, for example, which has always been seen as a very radicalized idea in the eyes of the Chinese Communist Party. But then these Hong Kong 47 are people from such various backgrounds, from such various walks of life, that includes, lifelong politicians from pan-democratic parties, that includes, trade unionists, that includes, social workers, that includes, academia from, law professors from the University of Hong Kong. So I think by sentencing all of these 47 people, I think it really demonstrated how far the Chinese Communist Party is willing to go to suppress dissent in Hong Kong and then to ensure that long-term political stability. And then the second thing is also that, we have always known, that we have seen in the past 4 years, how the Hong Kong government, how the Chinese Communist regime has been pivoting from ruling Hong Kong by law, have been pivoting from ruling Hong Kong off law to ruling Hong Kong by law. But then I think with this mass trial and in the sentencing of the Hong Kong 47, it further demonstrated how the Hong Kong government, how the authorities is planning to rule Hong Kong in the future by fear, by sentencing almost all of the prominent pro-democracy voices in Hong Kong, to instill that kind of fear inside of the people in Hong Kong, to ensure that they no longer organize political activities, whether it is protests, demonstrations, or reading clubs, or any kinds of political participation. So I think these two are the very important implications that the international society needs to bear in mind when they look at the case of the Hong Kong 47. And then another thing that I would also like to mention is also about the increasing oppression against media in Hong Kong. In Tibet, for so many years, for so many decades, we have seen a media blackout where international journalists are completely banned. There are no local journalists who are able to communicate that information from on the ground in Tibet to the outside world, which have caused such a huge information gap when when it comes to the international community or exiled activists advocating for Tibet. And I think obviously the situation in Hong Kong right now is nowhere near that level of seriousness in Tibet. However, I do think we are already seeing the trend of the Hong Kong government trying to do something very similar by over the past few years banning the visa approvals for international journalists, from preventing international journalists from reporting, talking to people on the ground, and then preventing local on the ground journalists from even entering the courtroom to report on the Hong Kong 47 case. So I think this is another instance that really mirrored how the Chinese authorities have been trying to move its policies from East Turkestan and Tibet to Hong Kong and potentially in the future to Taiwan. We don't know. But yeah, overall, I think these three things are, something important that we should think about when we look at this case.
Thank you, Joey, and thank you for giving this perfect example of Tibet and East Turkestan. I think this is how you can explain what is going on in Hong Kong right now. Athena, let's hear your perspective on this.
Thank you, Sakina. And again, thank you, AFI, for having us. This is a panel that I was really looking forward to. And obviously, wonderful panelists. It's always kind of hard to go last because I don't want to repeat too much. So I'll try my best. Regarding the Hong Kong 47 case, I would just add to what my colleagues have already said, that it is essentially their attempt to wipe out two generations of political leaders. Of course, we have new leaders who are, up and coming and who are already, very, who are very eloquent and have been leading our movement in diaspora. But it was a heavy hit, admittedly. And the 45 have been held in detention, a lot of them for more than 3 years, which in 5 years ago, 10 years ago, is something that was simply unimaginable, because we had to some degree the rule of law that was still intact, protected by the common law system, etc. But obviously that has changed. Right now we have no opposition in our legislature, and when the national security law came into force in 2020, the evening before, a lot of NGOs and CSOs have announced that they're closing down, political parties getting disbanded, etc., because everything was so vague. Nobody knew where the line was. And one toe over the line that you don't know where it is could put you in jail, essentially. And again, to echo Joey's point, the suppression of the press, with the Stan Yu case a couple of months earlier, they were accused of inciting subversion simply by printing stories. So with no opposition in legislature, CSO society that has more or less crumbled, and no free press. So who is there to keep the government in check? They're pretty much free to do whatever they want at this point. And I think one of the more important points of the Hong Kong 47 is that it showcases how the Hong Kong law, especially those which are related to national security, are getting a lot closer to the PRC laws. As I mentioned earlier, Hong Kong follows the common law tradition, whereas the PRC does not. It follows the constitutional law tradition, which, in Hong Kong system is not really built to have those safeguards when a constitutional legislation is kind of forced into the system. In addition to that, national security law in 2020 was passed in Beijing. It wasn't passed in Hong Kong. It wasn't until March 2024 with the Article 23's SNSO that it was passed in now an opposition-free LegCo in Hong Kong. And that entails in both legislation vague definitions for legal terms such as state secrets, foreign actors, which goes back to the point I made earlier that you don't know where the line is. Essentially, if they want to target you, whatever you do, they can put you in the category of going against national security. Even if you're technically not pro-independence, they will categorize you as pro-independence at this point. And in regards to what rights or freedoms this case has violated in Hong Kong, I would say it's pretty much a big part of what is protected under the Bill of Rights. Of course, it ties into international covenants that Hong Kong is party to, including the ICCPR, Universal Periodic Review. Would have already covered that in January, CAT, CEDAW, etc. All the international covenants that contributed to Hong Kong's Bill of Rights that protects the right to fair trial, free speech, freedom of association, and a lot more. And of course, just to add at the end, I know that you said that we'll talk a bit more about the SNSO, but just because it touches on the case of Hong Kong 47, as Amy mentioned, it does have a bit of a retrospective element to it, that sentence reduction on good behavior is no longer an option. So it is completely different to when the trial or when the arrest started. So this completely throws the cost of basically participating in civil disobedience that was 3 or 4 years ago, or even more at this point.
Thank you so much, Athena, for sharing your insights. And I think from the first question, we've highlighted the gravity of the situation. And from what I have observed is that the trial not only targets the activist, but also sends a chilling message to anyone advocating for democracy. And this is happening not just to the ones living in Hong Kong, but also to those living outside of Hong Kong. And with this, the Chinese government and Hong Kong authorities' crackdown on Hong Kong has forced over 200,000 Hong Kongers to emigrate worldwide. Yet even in exile, pro-democracy advocates remain under threat from the far-reaching arm of the national security law. With bounties placed on the heads of activists and ongoing intimidation, the challenges for those advocating for freedom and democracy from abroad are immense. How is your organization addressing these transnational threats to ensure the safety of the activists in exile, and how do you personally navigate these risks while continuing your work? Carmen, let's start with you, as you were recently targeted alongside 7 other activists just before Christmas with the bounty of 1 million Hong Kong dollars placed on your head. What is the situation now?
So unfortunately, I'm not sure if it's coincidence, but unfortunately, yet on Christmas Eve, I received an arrest warrant with a bounty under national security law, topping up my ICAC arrest warrant, which has been issued 3 years ago. And for now, there are in total 19 exiled activists are wanted with bounty under the national security law by the Hong Kong government, and that includes Joey as well. And yeah, but to me, I think these sort of transnational repression behavior is outraging, and not only arrest warrants that the government has been issuing, but also different types of transnational repression, including, physical assaults during protests, and including surveillance, including harassment to not only activists but also community members. And because apart from advocacy work, I also do community organizings in the UK, and we have almost 200,000 of Hong Kongers currently residing in the UK now. And we could see that there's a lot of fears and self-censorship amongst Hong Kongers, just because the named activists have been targeted by the Hong Kong government. And for now, for example, like HADC, advocacy groups like HADC, we've been advocating against transnational repression by the CCP. If you may heard of the Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office, which is a types of outpost for the Hong Kong government, where its purpose was supposed to be promoting economic and trade for Hong Kong, but then it has gone beyond these aims and goals for the HAETOs. It has been using weaponizing to surveil and to use as a weapon to harass Hong Kongers abroad. Recently, there's just been a case in the UK about a spy case where 3 of the defendants they have direct contacts with the HATO in London, and one of them is actually the office manager for the HATO as well. So you could see how direct that the Hong Kong government has been coordinating these sort of transnational repression activities across the world. And so HADC and other organizations in the US and also in Canada and in the UK, we've been advocating for a review or a cancel for the diplomatic privileges and immunities for the Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office in order to stop this sort of surveillance and intelligence and transnational repression behaviors by the Hong Kong government. And for safety and security for people, apart from from the advocacy perspective, we are also working hard on empowering our diaspora ourselves. Not only hosting security trainings or whatsoever, but also raising the awareness not only among the Hong Kong community, but also our own neighborhood and community in general, in order to gather larger protection from the community, from the authority, and from the local authorities as well. And personally, how to navigate the risks. I'm still trying to navigate. It's just been 2 days that I got bounty on me, and but fortunately for me, I'm not the first one who received this sort of arrest warrants with bounties. So I believe that activists, we are sharing information and experiences on how to tackle this sort of fear or security issues among ourselves, but at the same time I'm glad that I got support from police and from the government immediately after the announcement was made.
Thank you so much, Carmen. Joey, you are also one of them who were targeted, and I think you've been targeted even before as well, right? So can you tell us what's going on right now? Like, how is the situation now?
Sure. So, the arrest warrant for me and the bounty came on December 13, 2023, which is, a little over a year now. And obviously, I think the bounty and arrest warrant itself garnered a lot of international attention and obviously attention from law enforcement locally here in the United States. I've been put in touch with the FBI and other agencies who would be relevant to, tackling or investigating the issues of the ongoing transnational repressions, including the case of myself here in the US. However, I think what is really important for us to all recognize is that no democracy right now has sufficient mechanism and protocol to respond and then to react to transnational repression. Even for the US right now, which I think all of us can agree is one of the few democracies that has a relatively more comprehensive understanding of transnational repression. However, we can see that from so many cases that are happening across the US, only a few gets prosecuted, in the US this year. So I think that really reflected the general lack of the understanding of TNR orchestrated by the Chinese Communist Party, by other authoritarian regimes, including Iran, Russia, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it is really important for us to recognize that, when we talk about addressing transnational repression to ensure the safety of us activists in exile, to ensure the safety of our community members, it is so important for us to recognize that this is not a sole responsibility that our organizations can take when the scheme is actually orchestrated by a state actor, wealthy, powerful as the Chinese Communist Party. It really requires a cross-agency effort here in the US. It requires a multinational collaboration between the US and other democracies that houses, activists in exile to collaborate, to actively share information, to ensure that we have a comprehensive understanding of what is going on, what needs to happen to address the issues, and what else can we do to further, offer that protection for, those of us who are facing TNR. And I think, obviously, when we think about addressing TNR, there are so many things that that should be done and have to be done legislatively. That could include, what Carmen has been talking about, what her organization HADC and a lot of others in London, in Washington D.C. and elsewhere have been advocating for, which is the removal of the Hong Kong Economic and Trade Offices, which essentially has been acting as almost like a secret police station that has been spying on our diaspora communities, that has been collecting intel for the Hong Kong authorities. That should be the first step. However, I think what is more important is that it is so crucial for host countries to offer stability for activists in exile and our diaspora community members, because without that stability, without that permanent residency status here in democracies, you would never be able to offer the same level of protection that you will offer to citizens, to our diaspora community members. And our diaspora community members will forever be living in the fear of being deported back to Hong Kong one day, and that would prevent them from, engaging in political diaspora advocacy in exile. Democratic governments like to say that the path of or the journey of fighting back against China's illiberal influence really relies on our diaspora members, rely on people like us who have the lived experiences to tell the story, to fight this fight, and then to amplify this idea. However, without stability in our countries, in the host countries, our diaspora members would never be able to do that. So something that our communities in the U.S. Have been advocating for is for the administration to extend the deferred enforced departure policy, which is a policy under which housed so many over 3,000 Hong Kongers in the U.S. right now. If that is to be revoked, these 3,000 Hong Kongers, they would again have to go on the path of being exiled and finding a new home. And some of them would need to go back to Hong Kong because they were left with no choice. So when situations like this happens, when our diaspora community members have to worry about this on a daily basis, how can we expect them to, to take a step forward and then to publicly advocate for policies against TNR, or to talk about TNR that has happened on them? That would not be possible. So I think, there are so many steps that we can take to address this, but first of all, we will start with these two.
Thank you so much, Joey. Amy, let's hear your perspective on this. What do you think about the transnational repression imposed by Beijing on the pro-democracy Hong Kongers in exile?
I can tell you that this transnational repression is real in Europe. To give you a very concrete example, before the national security law came into effect, we're talking about early 2020. Every time I organize a protest in Berlin, in Germany, we get 20, 30, 50 Hong Kongers even. And very obviously, after the national security law came into effect, we have routinely 5, 10, sometimes 3 Hong Kongers. And you can see that this chilling effect that Carmen mentioned, the self-censorship that Carmen and Joey mentioned, it is real. It's a daily thing that happens to us. And in Europe, thankfully, the actual severity of transnational repression is right now not as bad as in, for example, in the UK and in North America, but does exist. And this is why our alliance is trying to serve as a platform to first gather information of what actual cases we have in Europe, because to a very large degree, because of this chilling effect and self-censorship, we don't really talk about it. And without actual data and information, we cannot advocate for our own safety. So we try to share information, gather concrete cases. And with that, we go to the stakeholders at the European level. We are talking about the politicians at the European Parliament, the administrators in the various arms of the EU administration, and we tell them this is actually daily reality for us. It does happen to us. And on top of what the two speakers earlier already mentioned, there is the Hong Kong ETO issue. We have 2 on continental Europe, one in Brussels and one in Berlin. And so my alliance has also been advocating that the special status of the HK ETO should be reviewed. And we do not want them to serve as the secret police stations, just like Joey said, to spy on us and do other really horrible things like what happened in the UK. And perhaps just to round off at a personal level, what happens to me, I'm not as famous as some others, and thankfully I don't have a bounty on my head, but it does mean I do have to face this as a daily reality. I get all kinds of stupid phishing messages and attempts on my phone. And every time we go to protest, we notice that people take pictures of us, they follow us. It is a reality. And like Joey said, there is unfortunately not enough awareness at many levels in different government officials. And so our alliance has also been joining other forces like the Uyghurs, the Tibetans, other people repressed by other authoritarian regimes like Russia, Belarus, Syria, Iran, etc. And we try to tell the various governments at the different European countries, as well as the European Parliament level, that TNR is real. There has to be something to be done about it. Here are the cases. Let's talk about it. And I think this is a very good first step. Unfortunately, we are still at the very first step stage at this point.
Thank you so much, Amy. Athena, let's hear your perspective.
Sure. Thank you. I will just add to what everybody has said, that yes, having our photos taken at protests is essentially pretty much expected at any protests, be it for Hong Kong, for Uyghurs, for Tibetans, etc. At this point, it's a very well, it's more of an intimidation tactic than intel collection at this point, because they more or less know who is going and who is not. But it's meant to scare and it's meant to intimidate. And to a certain degree, it does work, because people still have to wear masks, or they start to not show up because they are scared. There are people who want to go back to Hong Kong still, or they have families in Hong Kong. And that is one of the areas of concern for those who still want to participate in advocacy for Hong Kong, even though they are in diaspora. And of course, this needs to be addressed, and the people who do this need to be held accountable. But sometimes it's not that easy. When you call the police and the police arrive, they're already gone. So highlighting that this is a very common practice for them. In addition to phishing, a lot of spamming, gender targeting on social media, harassment. I'm sure Joey and Carmen have plenty of examples to show as well. I think Carmen got targeted on the International Human Rights Day. And maybe I can talk a little bit about academia. I think it's a pretty important space when it comes to transnational repression. I believe Amnesty had a report on this in April, that even when you're in universities and in a classroom with a closed door, it doesn't mean that you're safe from transnational repression, because you don't know which one of your classmates or your students are recording, or who is giving that intel to the Chinese embassy in whichever host country you're in. And if you're holding a Hong Kong passport, how do you renew it? If you need to set foot in the Chinese embassy, then you are on Chinese soil. And that is a lot of fear to have to face. Or you might have to go passportless if your passport expires and you're not in a country that offers any sort of safe boat scheme at this point. And that in itself is transnational repression. And there are professors, there are lecturers who hold their tongue and don't go as far, because they know that it's sensitive. They know that this information might get sent to the Chinese embassy. And of course, I believe that this is not only in Japan, this is also in the US, it is also in France and Germany, etc., that they have student associations. They have different hierarchies where they have school-based and then city-based, and then like province-based and then national based, which then report to the Chinese embassy of all the intel that they have gathered. So even though your peer or your student might actually be pro-democracy, you have no idea, because if they actually are, they probably won't be saying anything about it. So this severely cracks down on academic freedom, even outside of Hong Kong. And obviously this is not conducive to research, because how do you collect data? And how do you collect testimony in that sense? And how do you ensure neutrality? So this is something that definitely needs ongoing research on, and more observation and recording on, just so that we can keep our academic spaces free, so that it can continue to foster further discussions and address the changing norms of our international order at this point.
Thank you, Athena, and thank you for sharing your experiences. I think one of the main important points that we've come out from this discussion is to talk about HKETO. Targeting the activist, even in exile, shows the extent of Beijing's transnational repression and is also a powerful reminder of the urgent need of global solidarity. Now, the national security law, which essentially criminalizes dissent of any form, combined with the passage of Article 23 in March 2024, marks China's targeting grip on the rights and freedom of the people of Hong Kong, like we've already mentioned before. So, do these developments signal the death of the basic law, which promises one country, two systems, and the protection of the rights and freedoms of the people of Hong Kong? If so, what kind of message does this send to countries like Taiwan? Because Beijing is trying to bring under its control with similar promises. So, how can this international community respond to the actions of the Chinese government and the Hong Kong authorities? Carmen, let's start with you.
So the way that the Hong Kong government is cracking down not only the human rights but the entire social system and economic system in Hong Kong, it is actually an erosion on the one country two system, and not to mention the basic law. And when we question about the legitimacy of the Hong Kong economic and trade offices around the world, it is actually also we are actually also questioning the one country two system principle that has been destroyed since the national security law, actually since I must say the 2019 movement, when the moment when the police stepped into the legislative council. There has no more, three pillars of power inside of Hong Kong, where it's, the fundamental stone for the one country two system, and the autonomy of Hong Kong. And I think it's for so many years that the Chinese government wanted to demonstrate, the advantage and the good side of the one country two system to Taiwan, using Hong Kong as an example. But I think after 2019, their strategies has changed, and it is no longer relevant to the situation in Taiwan. And you can see from how the recent very active activities across the Taiwan Strait, and the very radical responses and statements being made by the CCP and the PRC government. And so how could international community respond to the actions like this? I think a lot of countries and even democracies, they will still see Hong Kong as to a certain level autonomous, because the Hong Kong government has been promoting its campaigns that's telling the international community that Hong Kong is back on track, and economic and financial situation has been back to normal, and business are as usual, which is not. But we could see that a lot of different democracies or free countries that has been supporting the Hong Kong democracy movement, they also adopt these narrative posed by the Hong Kong government. For example, for the UK government, the FCDO, the Foreign Department of the UK government, they conduct a report on Hong Kong every half year, and in the recent reports on the economic perspective of Hong Kong, they will still say that Hong Kong business is as usual, and they welcome UK businesses and commercial activities with Hong Kong. And these sort of narratives been posing in different democracies even, and we think that this is a way that how I mean, taking a narrative change would be so helpful in raising the awareness of the issues in Hong Kong. And we always emphasize that it is not only a human rights issue in Hong Kong, but is the whole society change in general. So we hope that international community could really takes our reports and our briefings as serious, and to realize that the situation in Hong Kong cannot be separated from political, human rights, and economy, but they are all in one.
Thank you so much, Carmen. Amy, let's hear your perspective on this.
Thank you, Sakina. Yes, I can add on to what Carmen just said. Just in general, in terms of how China or Beijing has simply so blatantly violated the agreements in the Sino-British Joint Declaration. It's an international treaty. It is internationally binding, and there is one party of these one of the two parties just saying, "Oh, okay, we are not going to do anything about this treaty anymore. This is a historical document." At that point, there had been basically no reaction from the international community. And to this date, I think China has still not been held responsible for this violation. And if we think of all the other things that China has also done, we're talking about human rights violations, especially against the Tibetans and the Uyghurs, how they also do not hold on to their international agreements and obligations in other realms and other treaties. They aspire to undermine the world order, and they're trying to do all kinds of military intimidation to Taiwan, and so on. So far, the international community still has not really stepped up to the plate and show that China, you have to be held accountable. This is not acceptable. That is not acceptable. There is so much more to be done. And I can say a bit more about the European situation. So at the European Parliament, which are representatives elected by various European peoples, at this parliament, there has been a few resolutions passed condemning the Chinese government for doing this and that against the Uyghurs, also against Hong Kongers. This is very positive. What we don't see, however, is in the administration, in the execution arm of the European Parliament. Now, the various member state governments, they do not do anything that actually bring consequences to these violations. And there is this disconnect between what the people are saying, hey, you are our elected representatives, please raise our voice and say something, resolutions are passed, and then no concrete actions from the actual governments. And that I find lacking. And this is not just in Europe, like what Carmen said, also in other countries, perhaps especially the UK, you simply have to step up to the plate and say, this is not acceptable. Maybe I will just say two more words about Taiwan. Maybe some of you have seen a picture where some Hong Kongers raised a placard to Taiwanese and said, "This one country, two system setup that's been broken and violated. We can demonstrate this only once." And Hong Kong has done this, and unfortunately, this is a very bad example for Taiwan. And we have hope that the same does not happen to Taiwan.
Thank you so much, Amy, and thank you for bringing up the topic regarding the EU when the resolutions are placed, but then there is a lack of execution. Athena, let's hear your perspective on this.
Sure, thank you. So again, I feel the biggest lesson here for the international community is that the PRC obviously does not respect or honor any of its promises to the international community. They are forcing their way through things and basically forcing the rest of the world to just let it go and let them do whatever they want. Very common tactics include economic coercion, information manipulation, trying to manipulate what we understand as the international law. Again, with the Taiwan example, how they manipulate what we understand, even if we don't count it as Taiwan water. If we see it as international waters, it still does not justify what they've been doing in terms of gray zone tactics in that area. And of course, not only in the in regards to Taiwan, but also with the Philippines, with the Tibetan Indian borders, etc. They're just trying to push our boundaries little by little. Again, maybe a larger degree of the termite example that Amy raised a little earlier, and to a point where maybe we don't understand what international law is anymore at one point. And of course, covenants enshrined in multilateral frameworks, they will always say that if you comment or if you criticize or if you try to hold them accountable to any sort of degree, they will say you are interfering with internal affairs. Which is ironic because you made these promises in multilateral frameworks. As such, you should be held accountable in multilateral frameworks by your peers and other member states. In regards to the Basic Law, it is a result of the Sino-British Joint Declaration from the 1980s. Anyone who has taken a law course in Hong Kong, first class, they will tell you the Hong Kong Basic Law is the mini constitution of Hong Kong. Obviously, this designation is no longer allowed in Hong Kong because this will mean that the Basic Law is the highest body of law in Hong Kong, which for them is no longer the case because national security-related legislation now takes a higher priority. As such, they are again trying to muddle with what we have already clearly defined as our legislative framework and body. And how should the international community respond? First of all, I think things have changed quite a bit from 7 years ago. 7 years ago, when we were talking about these with lawmakers, with policymakers, they were extremely reluctant to let go of the Chinese market and therefore very reluctant to say anything that criticizes the PRC government in any sense. Of course, this has changed. They know that it is unwise to trust any promises by the PRC, not only in terms of human rights, but also in other aspects like trade, like businesses, like like the economy, etc. And I think one of the most important things is to de-risk, simply, because how can you stand up to these authoritarian powers that you don't agree with if you still have, say, 90% of your energy supply chain in their hands? You have no say. And what if the future of your country's infrastructure is in their hands? It's extremely hard to speak up in that way. So first and foremost, de-risk your supply chains and your economy so that you will have also the freedom to speak. And second of all, hold them accountable when they disrespect the international law. That's the least you can do to uphold the dignity and the integrity of international law that we all signed on, including the PRC when they entered the United Nations.
Totally agree with you, Athena. Thank you so much. Joey, let's hear your perspective.
Sure. I think my co-panelists already made, a very great list of demands that the international community should be adapting to counter China's aggression and in its attempt to, destroy and disrupt the international rule-based order. I would just say that over the past few years, from the Sino-British Joint Declaration, from other promises related to, climate change in respect to, a fair and free economic trade relationship with other countries, we have seen how, the Chinese Communist Party have time and time again violated these promises and broke, agreements signed between their country versus the other democracies in the world. So I think, to make sure that any meaningful change is to happen, it is so important that we no longer shelve conversations about, human rights, democracy, international rule-based order in exchange for a chance to engage China in conversations that will only generate broken promises. I think that is a very important, mindset to adapt. I think in the past, we have seen how the U.S. have, sacrificed conversations and, opportunities to talk about Hong Kong, Tibet, East Turkestan, China's democratic developments, etc., in exchange for a chance to engage in, climate change conversations with China. Obviously, those conversations are very, very important for our generations and the generations to come as well. But how are we going to make sure that China no longer give us empty promises and break these promises that they were made during the conversations? I think that is a very, important thing to bear in mind of. And if those conversations must happen, those conversations about climate change, about economy, etc., when you engage in those conversations, talk about the camp top protests in Tibet, talk about the Dargit Dam protests in Tibet, talk about the forced labor involved in trade with the Chinese Communist Party, talk about when we talk about economy, talk about how the national security law is impacting American businesses and American interests in Hong Kong. And I think, Carmen made a very smart point earlier in regards to this question, is about how human rights, democracy, and freedom is always so intertwined with topics about economy, trade, climate change, and everything else. So when these conversations must happen, make sure that we are prioritizing, make sure that we are centering human rights and democracy and the release of political prisoners in these dialogues.
Thank you so much, Joey, and thank you to all our speakers for your insights. Now let's move on to the individual questions, where we will talk about your respective organizations and the initiatives that you undertake. Joey, let's start with you. Reflecting on your journey from a student activist to Hong Kong, student activist in Hong Kong to an internationally recognized advocate, your efforts, such as testifying before the US Congress, leading the hashtag No Beijing 2022 campaign, and collaborating with the global human rights defenders, among many others that you have done, have helped raise awareness about Hong Kong's democracy movement. So how do you measure the impact of your advocacy efforts on international policies and public opinion? What kind of responses, both challenges and support, have you encountered during your efforts to amplify Hong Kong's fight for freedom on the global stage? Joey, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Sakina. I think it's very difficult for us to, as activists in Excel, to measure our impacts because we don't have, very concrete scale, a very concrete, measurement for us to understanding, how far our impact is traveling, how successful our campaigns are. But I would take the, the No Beijing 2022 campaign as an example. That was a campaign that was led by so many young leaders, so many young female activists from our communities, activists from the Hong Kong community, from SFT, International Tibet Network, from, the World Uyghur Congress, and so many more. I think from that campaign, I would see that as a great success, not just because of how we managed to have, more than a dozen democracies commit to a diplomatic boycott of the Winter Beijing Olympics in 2022, but then really how this campaign have activated and mobilized so many young community members from our communities. Under that campaign, we organized so many global days of actions, and that was not just, organized all by our core group that is organizing this campaign, but then that was planned and facilitated by so many young activists who for the first time are organizing a protest in London, in Boston, in New York, all by themselves. We see activists as young as 13, 14 taking the lead, holding a megaphone in front of the protest line, chanting slogans about free Tibet, free East Turkestan, and free Hong Kong. And then we have also seen so many members from our communities coming together, writing letters to their congressional members asking for a diplomatic boycott. We've seen so many members from our communities who cannot be in the streets due to security reasons and obviously transnational repression concerns, who have utilized their knowledge to help us find out, which sponsors are paying for this Winter Olympics, where their headquarters are, how can we get in touch with their executives to, engage in direct communications with them to have them drop their sponsorship of the Beijing Winter Olympics. So I think oftentimes our successes and impacts cannot be measured by a visible scale, but I do think that these little steps of mobilizing and activating community members in your community are the key to the long-term success of our movement overseas, which will eventually one day, I believe, lead the way back to our free homelands, back to a free Lhasa, back to a free Hong Kong. So I do think in that sense, these successes are always encouraging. But then with that said, it always comes with, challenges. You always see the international community so slow in moving. And Athena mentioned how, with the huge Chinese market, with their supply chain so deeply intertwined, it is not easy for us to convince a multinational corporation to engage with human rights activists. It's not easy for us to have democratic countries to commit to a diplomatic boycott, which is an act that will deeply disappoint China and eventually lead to potential economic repercussions. However, we still managed to do that. So I think it really demonstrated how powerful and impactful grassroots mobilization and campaign could be. And hopefully this campaign will serve as a very great precedent for our future mobilizations in this long journey against battling against China's illiberal influence.
Thank you, Joey. And it's evident that despite the challenges, your efforts have been pivotal in keeping Hong Kong's fight for freedom in the global spotlight. Thank you, Joey. And moving on to Athena. In your role as program lead at the China Strategic Risk Institute, you've extensively analyzed China's use of economic coercion and misinformation as tools of control. Given the complexities of these strategies, how can democratic nations and the global Hong Kong diaspora effectively counteract Beijing's economic pressures? What innovative approaches do you see as key to resisting these tactics and building a more resilient and pro-democracy movement? Athena.
Thank you, Sakina. First of all, I think I'd like to reframe perhaps one of the wordings, because misinformation would basically mean that the PRC may not have meant it, that they misled by mistake. For me, for most cases, it is disinformation, because there is malign influence, and there is an ill intent to mislead the public, and not only their own public, but also the information space of other jurisdictions. And yeah, I can address the part on economic coercion first and economic security. Obviously, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, economic coercion is a commonly used tactic by the PRC. They dedicate a lot of their budget to this part of their so-called diplomacy. And in order to fight this, first of all, I would highlight the importance of cybersecurity. This is not only important for our own personal safety or the safety of the organizations or institutions that we work at, but it is important for private firms and governments as well. As I recently authored in my article for Jamestown, the PRC is no longer using only state actors or state bodies to hack or to undermine the integrity of their peers' cyberspace, but they are also employing private firms to be doing this. And there is evidence that they have hacked foreign governments and foreign companies, including their own allies in the Belt Road Initiative. And so cybersecurity is first and foremost extremely important. We have also seen APT-31 attacks targeting legislators who are part of IPAC, the IPAC network, in basically all the jurisdictions represented here today, including in the EU, in the US, in the UK. And the second part, I think, to fighting against this would be supply chain resilience. I talked a little bit about this before. I think the keywords here are reshoring and friendshoring, in that well, not you, but the democratic jurisdictions, we need to move towards a supply chain that is more domestic, or you friendshore part of your supply chain to countries that you can trust, that honor the same values as you do, for example, democracy or rule of law or human rights, or honoring promises to start with. And this is not only because of security in case there is a war, but also if we're talking green energy transition, it is part of your energy security. As I mentioned earlier, it is one of the bargaining chips that you would have, because the PRC now holds 89-90% of processing capabilities of critical minerals that are essential to green energy transition. And it's great that the world is moving towards energy sources that are more friendly to our planet. But if we're opting for the cheapest option out there, then we are compromising other parts of rights. And of course, environmental rights is an important part of rights, but so is dignified living and freedom from forced labor. So the EU, I believe, has passed a legislation in this legislative year to ban forced labor goods and services in the EU, and they are enforcing in different member states gradually. And I think a good example would be looking at Czechia and Lithuania. Actually, they have been pretty successful in de-risking their supply chain and keeping their supply chains mostly clean and well, they can't be manipulated by the PRC in that sense. And nobody wants to enable the governance of authoritarian regimes that would allow forced labor, which is against international laws and standards. And of course, it's important to address Hong Kong's role in being used in economic coercion, including Hong Kong being used to bypass economic sanctions for not only the PRC, but also Russia. And its companies being used to acquire dual-use technologies for these authoritarian regimes. And moving on to the second part, which is information operations, pre-bunking is a lot more effective than debunking. If the lies are already out there and they have made the rounds because we're living in a digital age, and then you debunk, it's a lot less effective. And at this point, there is pretty much a playbook of how they're going to play the narrative. For this panel, for example, they're going to say we're paid by the CIA, we are violent protesters. You can already tell the narratives that are going to come out. And since you can predict it, you can pre-bunk it. And I think there are playbooks out there for work done by excellent organizations like Double Think Lab. It's pretty helpful to look through that. And of course, identifying narratives that manipulate core concepts like human rights. Human rights with Chinese characteristics is not a thing. Rule of law, for example. And of course, media literacy and education is always encouraged, especially in our age of internet fragmentation. Our information space is getting increasingly fragmented, and 5 years from now, 10 years from now, people in Hong Kong and people in, say, for example, the US could have completely different understanding of basic facts. And at this point, I think the information operations is to a point where if you're presented with proof of something that is factual, you will still doubt it. So this is dangerous, and we need to address this as soon as possible to understand the basis of, for example, journalistic integrity, what is truth, and what is facts. And of course, identifying patterns is not always easy to link directly narratives to state actors, but you will see patterns. For certain narratives, it's obvious that it's state operated, even though you don't see the name PRC on the username. So these are, I think, pretty important. And of course, leading back to an earlier point that I think Carmen made on espionage, is national security, not just the Hong Kong version. We're talking the national security of the host countries that we are in. So I think it's important to pay attention to espionage and influence operations there affecting political behavior.
Thank you so much, Athena, for your thoughtful response. Your analysis highlights the critical need for innovative strategies and international collaboration to counter Beijing's growing influence. And since we're talking about espionage and we're talking about spies, it reminded me of Alex Joski's book, Spies and Lies. We had interviewed him, I think, 2 years or 1 year back. And this book is really amazing. I would recommend if you want to know about the spies and lies of the Chinese Communist Party. The next question I would like to direct to Amy. Amy, as a General Secretary of the European Hong Kong Diaspora Alliance and a leader at Freiheit für Hong Kong, you've worked to unite grassroots organizations across Europe while emphasizing the importance of cultural exchange alongside political advocacy. How do you foster a shared sense of purpose among the Hong Kong diaspora to resist fragmentation? And how can cultural preservation serve as a powerful tool against Beijing's attempts to erase Hong Kong's identity? What lessons can other global advocacy movements learn from your approach? Amy.
Thank you very much, Sakina. That is true. Europe is a very diverse place. Europe has many countries with very different cultures. They have their own political systems. And so we are very proud to have in our alliance members from 10 countries. But that also means our alliance members, they also have their individual specific country needs, and they might have also different goals they might want to reach. Some member organizations, they might want to do more advocacy. Some other organizations, they might want to do more cultural exchange, and so on. So in this very diverse setup, it is very, very important for us to find common ground. In fact, that is the secret sauce to the success of our alliance, and to find common ground and to find common goals. And like you said, cultural identity, cultural preservation is one of our primary goals in the alliance. And for us, we see it as one thing that serves multiple purposes. So for us to preserve our own culture, we are very proud of our unique Hong Kong culture. And to preserve that culture, we're preserving our identities in a very diverse European landscape to begin with. And when we present ourselves to the Europeans and other international communities, it is also our brand to sell to them that, hey, we are different. Hong Kong is not China. Part of our culture is also the desire for freedom and democracy, and our language, our food culture, our art, how we express ourselves during these times of difficulties, and so on. So for us, finding common ground, trying to preserve our culture, and it helps. This already helps us build a strong sense of community and togetherness in this very diverse diaspora in Europe. And maybe I can share how we, when we established the alliance, we're very new. We established only earlier this year. And one lesson we learned was that we really have to find, we have to share our goals and visions, and this really overcomes our differences. And another lesson that we learned was that it is really not enough for just a few or a bunch of activists from different needs and different backgrounds to come together and say, hey, we want an alliance. This is not going to last. We want to institutionalize our alliance or our coalition so that we can carry on when I am not so active, a new generation comes in, when new members come in, we would like this alliance to continue to flourish. And for that, we would need to institutionalize. And concretely, we're talking about we need to have a charter, we have to have rules and regulations of how we meet, how often do we meet, and so on. I know these are perhaps mundane details, but that is the other secret ingredient of our success in building this alliance. And perhaps I will close with a very personal story. So my daughter was born and raised in Germany, but I make sure she can speak fluent Cantonese. And this is my personal way of preserving our Hong Kong unique culture. I'm very proud of it.
Thank you so much, Amy. And it's inspiring to see how utilizing the diaspora and preserving culture can powerfully counter Beijing's suppression. I found this very much similar to the Tibetan community's efforts to preserve their culture in exile. And the cultural identity, I believe that is a powerful tool in countering Beijing's effort to erase identity. Now moving on to the last individual question um, to Carmen. Carmen, the Vote for Hong Kong 2024 campaign is a powerful example of how the Hong Kong diaspora can use political participation to influence international policy and advocate for democracy. So what impact has the campaign had so far in raising awareness and building alliances with policymakers? How do you plan to sustain and expand this momentum to keep Hong Kong's struggle visible on the global stage?
Thank you, Sakina. So the Vote for Hong Kong campaign is actually an effort through a lot of different organizations and Hong Kongers in the UK. So we've been sharing resources, and we've been not only raising the awareness among Hong Kongers that they can vote in the UK, but also, in the community, on the grassroots level, and also in the Westminster level. So as we conducted a survey report during the Vote for Hong Kong campaign before the January elections, about not only the party preferences of Hong Kongers, but also policy priorities of Hong Kongers. So we are still using that survey reports, and different organizations in the UK are also very welcome to use that survey report as a resources to demonstrate how Hong Kongers care about UK politics and and their policy priorities as well. And I think the situation in the UK is very unique because we have a significant numbers of Hong Kongers here, and at the same time, a lot of them I think over 60% of Hong Kongers here can vote. And in a political space, votes always matters. And I think especially when I came from a political background, so it is always a belief of me that we should utilize our political power in our host country as well to not only demonstrate how we cherish and how we practice democracy, but also at the same time as a very powerful and united tools to advocate for Hong Kong and advocates for the situation back in Hong Kong. And I believe that advocacy is not a thing that only activists or advocates are, are empowered to do, but everyone in our host country and everyone in our community should also participate. And apart from raising the awareness in the Westminster, we've also successfully, continue to stir up the momentum among Hong Kongers in the UK in caring about policies in the UK and the China policies, to be precise, in Westminster, in order to continue of our work and our movement. And and to wrap up, I want to thank you again for making this panel possible, and thank you for your support, and we always love to have cross movement solidarity together. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen, for sharing the impact of the Vote for Hong Kong 2024 campaign. Your efforts not only amplify the struggle for democracy, but also demonstrate the power of collective action on the international stage. And I would like to thank everyone for today's thought-provoking discussion. It was a really, really informative. And thank you, Amy, for sharing this really heart-touching story of your daughter. I think it is really important, even for us Tibetans, to continue preserving our identity, because we know that CCP is doing everything in their capacity to eliminate our identity. Thank you so much. And I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to our incredible panelists, Carmen, Amy, Joey, Athena. Today's discussion has reinforced the importance of understanding solidarity and taking a meaningful action to support those fighting for freedom. Please know that your courage and resilience inspire many, and your voices are essential in keeping this struggle alive on the international stage. Thank you so much once again to everyone, those who have made it for today's discussion, and to our viewers as well. And before I end, the video of the session will be uploaded on AFI's website at www.asiafreedominstitute.org. And please follow AFI's social media platforms, X, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram pages for more information on AFI's programs and activities. And we are also available both on Apple Podcast and YouTube. Thank you so much once again.